Hello my little earthlings, and welcome back to another video. This one's going to be about giving your characters distinct voices in your webcomic or comic. So let's start off with, what does it mean to give characters distinct voices? So this is very similar to the concept of giving each character sort of a distinct silhouette, and this is a concept that people are usually more familiar with, especially for comicking or for art, than they are for anything else, because if you're doing anything else, like you have an original character concept, or if you just like to draw digitally or traditionally, you just like to doodle, things like that, you might not really take the time to give your character a distinct voice. But because webcomicking and comicking is this crossover between digital or traditional art and a story of some sort of storytelling, you want to use a lot of the same principles and rules that you would for movies or books, which typically is to give your character a distinct voice. So a good way to do this, or what it basically means, is you really want every person to sound differently in your reader's head when they read them, or when there's a word bubble on the page and the character's not in that page, that they know that that is coming from which character. So a really good example of someone who does distinct voices really well would be Adam Warren with his series Empowered. I really like the characters in there, and I like their distinct voices. You can hear all of them very distinctly, especially the bad guys, things like that. He's really good at developing those individual voices. So if you need someone to look at to kind of see someone who's done it really well, go and check out his work. So how to give your character a distinct voice. So this is kind of tricky because part of it is going to be something you can control and part of it is something you can't really control, because the whole fun of developing characters and writing comics and telling stories is that the characters will reveal themselves to you in time. You can speed this process up, of course, by taking extra time to dig into your character and do interviews with them, question them. I'm going to do a whole nother video that talks about how to do this, but you can really, so you can push forward somewhat in terms of getting to know your characters better. And I definitely recommend do this with your weaker characters, because those are going to be the ones that are going to sound the most like you. They're going to sound like the default writer. So, and you don't really want that to come through. So some ways that you can give your character a distinct voice is to give them an accent and write in the slang that when people read it in their heads, they can hear the accent coming through. Another thing is to use slang, especially if you want to use slang for a certain time period. If it's from like the 90s and you want them to say something like yipes or cowabunga or something ridiculous like that, or booyah, then that also adds to the feel of the time as well as the character. This can be more tricky with sci-fi characters, I've noticed, because I am one of those people that never really liked when I watch sci-fi movies. It seems like everyone has a British accent, even if they're an alien or something, and that kind of bothers me. I have been tempted before to give my characters, especially my sci-fi novels, so much of a distinct voice that they literally don't speak in English and I just subtitle everything, but I realize that that's just a lot of extra work, and it's just not, I don't want to go that deep into being that, giving my character a voice. So a few other ways to give your character a distinct voice is if they have a little quirk or trait about themselves, like a lisp or something like that, or give them a fancy way of speaking. And what I mean by that is not accents, but something like a specific dialogue. Like maybe someone speaks more proper, so they don't say I'm, they say I am. Or they don't say don't, they always say do not. Or they might pick a bigger word. Instead of saying no, they might say negatory. Or instead of saying yes, they might say affirmative. Something like that. Something that'll show your audience a little bit more how formal your character is. And that can make a big difference. Like with E.T. Girl, Ramona has a tendency to talk in more of like, she uses slang. I give her some 90s slang here and there. She kind of has more of an informal way of speaking. She curses here and there. But with Fergus, with the doctor, he speaks more formal. So him and Stella both, they have a tendency to speak more formally. Stella's a little less formal than Gus, but Fergus definitely likes to use bigger words and more complicated, he has more complicated ways of structuring things he likes to say. I also had to make sure I gave him other things, like if he does curse, I gave him a very specific phrase. I don't remember what it is right now. It's like something like, I don't remember. It's like God of Thor or something, but not Thor. It was like something like that. It was like gods of Haxor or something. Like instead of cursing, it's like gods of Haxor. Just because there was a moment in my script, in my story, where I needed him to exclaim something, but I didn't want him to curse because it didn't fit his character, and I could feel that it didn't really fit him. So that's one of those things where I had to tweak it. Another important thing was it had been noted to me that I had made one of my Aerokin characters, one of the aliens, say that the treatment of the ship was inhumane. And by saying inhumane, that is a terminology that came from the human language. So I went and I had to edit that. Someone had one of my beta readers had recommended that I edit that, so it might be something like cruel, because that's more of a general phrasing than inhumane, which is very specific to human speak or human speech. So that was a good piece of advice, to change that phrasing. Why it's important to give your characters distinct voices. So the reason why this is important is partially because it adds to the immersiveness of the experience of reading your webcomic, and also it can make your characters a lot more endearing if the audience can see how the author or writer views them in their head, or how they hear them in their head. So it makes them more attached to them, because it's just another facet of how you can make your audience connect with your character. And I find it to be a really interesting one, because it's one that only really comes about in comics, webcomics, and books. You don't really have this with movies, because in movies they show you, and you can listen to how the characters sound. I mean, yes, if you get an audio book, you can hear an interpretation of how the reader, or perhaps even the author, does the different accents and things like that. But if you're reading it for yourself, you really do get this experience of hearing the character in your head in a way that is very distinct to you. And it is influenced by the author, though. Like, you do have an opportunity as the writer or the creator of the work of your webcomic to influence that in your reader's head. So why not, right? Like, why not make your story even more immersive to them? So the other reason why it's important to give them distinct voices is because it really shows how well you know your character as the author. If you can hear them talking to you in your head, it makes it so everyone doesn't sound so like flat across the board, in terms of like nothing special or distinct about them. So it's similar to having the proper silhouettes for your characters. So one of the things about developing a character's voice that you can't control is really just how they end up developing by the end of your story. So the unique thing about webcomics and comics particularly is that they are one of those sort of mediums that grow and change with time, and they get better with the writer or the artist, or both, as the story progresses. So what that means is, like, don't beat yourself up if at the very beginning of your comic your characters all sound very similar, or they use the same sort of slang, or if they don't seem to have very distinct voices. That's something that, like I said, the more you get to know your character, and the more you question them and figure out their likes and their dislikes, and you develop their background, you're going to hear their voice come out. And some of that really only happens with time. I've been working on E.T. Girl for 6 years, and when I first started writing it, Ramona, the way that she spoke and the way that she held herself was a little different than she does now. I have some of the old scripts of how I used to write her, and a lot of the ways I used to write Ramona was pretty insecure, pretty immature, and she got embarrassed very easily by things that were sex or sexual related things. I ended up sort of developing her character more into being a little bit more confident in herself, but she does still have her level of insecurities. The other thing I made sure I cut a lot from her old dialogue was she used to go on these long rambling things of asking questions about everything, because me as the author, I didn't know how to portray to the audience, like I didn't know how to explain to the audience about certain things unless I had Ramona act as the audience and ask all the questions. So she'd be like, where did this come from? Where did my clothing come from? How did I appear on the ship naked? La la la. And it got a little rambly, and I kind of realized a lot of my scripts early on with her were just a lot of things that her, or perhaps even the other characters, would say were kind of redundant and unnecessary. So I cut down a lot on that, and I try to pick what I want her to say a little bit more carefully. And now that I've worked with Ramona, especially for 6 years, I went from having her be sort of a little bit too much like myself, and more into someone that has come into her own, with her own background stories and her own struggles and her own problems and her own reasons for doing things, and all of that. So you might notice that the voice for her is going to change as the story progresses. I already know for a fact that I want it to by the end of the story, but no matter what, because some of the work that I've done, some of the comic pages I've done are literally 6 years old. Yes, I've been able to change the scripting over the years, but some of that original feeling of how she was still portrayed in the pages. So same thing with Fergus's character. I really kind of just had him speak very formally, and I had no other little quirks or things about him that were distinct. And it wasn't until this last year, in 2018, I spent the entire year trying to fully develop Fergus's character, because for the last 6 years, I didn't even have a proper piece of concept art sketched out for him. I had a lot of trouble with developing how he should look. I just knew sort of what I wanted him to be and what I wanted him to do. So developing his voice took an extra long amount of time, because I was so delayed on even getting his reference sheet finished, his character design done. Yeah, that's one of those things that you just be aware of, and just understand it's normal, it's part of the process. And unless you want to sit there and hold on to your comic and never post it for 10 years and just really work on the story and research it, or unless you have an entire team of people working on it with you, it's one of those things where it's just normal and natural, and it's gonna be a part of the process of webcomicking. And it's kind of, honestly, it's something that the audience really enjoys. Like, they're there for the ride. You know, these people will be there for the years and years and years that you're working on this comic. Maybe not everyone, but for the most part, your core audience will be there, and they love to watch you grow, and they love to watch you develop your characters and start to draw them better and hear their distinct voices come out. It's really the thing that makes the medium of webcomicking the most unique to me, the most unique form of storytelling that you really don't see with anything else that seems to be very polished, like a TV show or a professionally done comic that comes out one issue every month sort of deal, you know? So just remember that, you know, don't feel insecure about it. Your audience will, you know, they'll be there through it with you, and they want to see where this goes, you know? So, yeah, good luck with it, everyone, and let me know how it goes with your character's voice and the development of it. And if you need any more advice on it or anything like that, you can always ask me a question on my Tumblr, which is The Planet Streamer. You can tweet at me, which is also The Planet Streamer, and I do have an Instagram as well. All of them are under the name The Planet Streamer. I'm trying to make it very the same across the board, so it's easy peasy for people to remember. And if you want to check out more of my comic, I have E.T. Girl up on Webtoons for free. And if you'd like to see the uncensored pages, or if you'd like to see some pages in advance, or if you'd like to see the work in progress stuff, I have the Patreon up and rolling for that as well. I also have some merch in the making, so keep an eye out for that if you want to get t-shirts and other fun things related to E.T. Girl. And actually, I'm working on the print book as well. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching, and yeah, let me know your little tips and tricks for developing your characters' voices, or if you have any questions. Yep, good luck on your comics, and I'll see you guys in the next video.